Hello and good evening. You're watching Malaysia Memilih. This is Astro AWANI's comprehensive coverage of GE15 and beyond. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Hafiz Marzuki. And as you know, we have just seen the swearing in of Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim earlier today. And you'll be able to catch all the coverage only on Astro AWANI, and it is a historic moment,
well,
right?
It's 10 p.m. and we have our 10th p.m. I know that joke is
just
really...
the right timing, right? Just the right timing.
I know that joke is quite bossy, but I really wanted to use it because it's 10 p.m. So
there's no better time on the first day, right?
Exactly. So again, if you haven't been watching Astro AWANI all day long with the swearing in and the press conference, I think there's a lot to cover. But what really is important is the fact that we now know we have more clarity as to what the government might look like, who's heading the government, and what's next. So that's going to be some of the key questions we want to answer today.
Yes, exactly. And okay, we have with us, joining us in the studio today at night. So tonight is Qyira Yusri, co-founder and education director of UNDI 18. She's also the special advisor for youth for the EU Commissioner on International Partnerships. Welcome, Qyira. Thank you so much.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's really good to have you here on the show. I mean, I'm sure you have been on tenterhooks with everyone else trying to figure like the guessing game, and now we finally have that riddle answered. But I think what I want to begin with is this question of, this past 5 days, beyond the uncertainty and the everyone, edge of the seat kind of refreshing Twitter feeds and all of that, what has it represented to you? What have you learned in the past 5 days that has resonated with you?
Yeah, I think the first and foremost is that the incredible number of voter turnout rate. I think this is in history, we have the highest amount of voters coming out to vote, which means that, whichever coalition is in power, it is extremely legitimate because the amount of people that chose to come out and vote on election day is phenomenal. And I think, of course, as someone who's been pushing UNDI 18, just seeing young people being so excited to vote is incredibly, I just feel so proud and so relieved to see that politics is something that young people do care about. And of course, I think beyond the uncertainty, all that, of course, now even moving forward with today's swearing in, there will still be more uncertainties, what the cabinet will look like, what policies will be formed. The fact of the matter is that it is, in a way, a brand new Malaysia. I know we said new Malaysia like 4 years ago, but this is Malaysia. I mean, this is still uncharted territory.
Even newer Malaysia.
Yeah, every day we go forward is a new Malaysia. It's something that we've never had before.
Yeah, I understand that you were actually on the campaign trail with one of the candidates, Syed Saddiq. What were the observations during this particular campaign?
I think it's my first time being on a campaign trail supporting a candidate. And of course, Saddiq is not just any candidate, but he's also the president of a youth-led party. So seeing how people respond to that has been very eye-opening for me. And of course, Muar alone is an extremely interesting constituency as well. You have the fishermen community, you have the small businesses, you have young people as well. You have people who, and a lot of Muar voters also live outside. So how do we capture them? How do we engage them? Was a whole journey for 2 weeks. But it wasn't just 2 weeks of campaign trail, right? Parliament dissolved weeks before the official campaign started. So you can say that technically everyone involved in politics would be campaigning for about a month or slightly more than that.
Yeah.
So it was quite exhausting. I think we're all looking forward to the weekend and the Monday public holiday.
That's right. That's right. If you missed the news, Monday is a public holiday. Okay, so you pointed to something quite interesting, which is the fact that this is all kind of uncharted territory. We're all learning. This is a new step for Malaysia, and the question would be, now the hard work begins, right? What does what does the formation of government look like? What should it look like? So let's pose these questions to Dr. Tricia Yeoh. She's the CEO of the think tank Ideas Malaysia. Tricia, the PM has been named, sworn in now. Days of guessing have finally come to an end. What form should governments take now? What would it look like in terms of power sharing? And what should it look like in terms of inclusivity and representation?
Hi, Melissa. Thanks for having me back here. I think it's been a big day for everyone. We know now who the Prime Minister is, and of course, they're looking forward to the cabinet. Well, what the government should look like, of course, taking a leaf out of what the Agong has said, and also from the press conference that Datuk Seri Anwar just gave, it does certainly sound like we do need to have an inclusive government, a government that is representative of all parts of Malaysia, representative of different ethnicities and religions and communities. But given the fact that we have such a large coalition of coalitions this time, even larger than before, so I think the kind of negotiations about cabinet positions, ministers, deputy ministers, that will be really interesting to see what emerges out of that negotiation. I suspect Sabah and Sarawak, of course, will need to be given the positions. If you look at the manifesto of Pakatan Harapan itself, they also had promised to give one deputy prime ministership to Sabah and Sarawak collectively, and then one to the peninsula. So I know in our idea statement we did call for a smaller cabinet and not such a bloated one, but I'm not so sure whether that's going to be realistic, honestly.
Talking about being realistic, what should the Prime Minister's first priorities be, Tricia?
So I have also said this today in our statement that one thing a lot of people are asking about is whether or not there will be stability within this government. So, for example, the UMNO General Assembly is going to be meeting a month from today, right, the 24th of December. Whether or not, if there are any changes to the leadership lineup, for example, would they change their support for the Prime Minister? So something needs to happen to assure the public, the voters, the investors that there is some kind of built-in mechanism to ensure that this is the government to stay. Whether it comes in the form of an MOU or an agreement or something of that sort, I do believe that's important. But I think what he has just said in the press conference about having a vote of confidence on the first day of parliamentary sitting on the 19th, that will probably send some assurances as well. And of course, the next thing would be to put together a budget quickly for next year. And if they can't do a full budget in time because we are really coming to the end of the year already, then probably a special parliamentary sitting, the one starting on the 19th of December, just to pass the initial expenditures for civil servant salaries before, or rather while working out a full budget document.
Tricia, can I press you on that point about ensuring the stability of this government? So while the confidence vote in Parliament may ensure the kind of short-term legitimacy of the Prime Minister going into this administration, the question is, what about the longer term? What would ensure the stability of the next government so that there isn't, because it's so many different parties and coalitions with different agendas and ideologies, and the question is, how do we make sure that there's stability and there's working together and that it's effective?
Well, if we can recall the MOU that was signed last year by Ismail Sabri and the opposition, I think that actually set a good precedent, because if you remember, just before the MOU was signed, there was also a lot of political instability and uncertainty over whether the government would change. UMNO had threatened to pull out its support for Perikatan Nasional already, right, as early as middle of last year. So it was only after the MOU was inked that we got some sense of stability, and the clause within the MOU was very explicit in stating that no dissolution would happen, or rather the MOU would last all the way up to June of this year. So it did provide some stability, and I wonder whether that similar clause can be included in such an agreement or arrangement. I know no one's really talked about this yet, but can that be included to explicitly state like a full term to be served, and the assurances given by each of the coalitions, by BN, by GPS, our commitment is for that length of time, right? So I think that's something positive. I mean, I have not heard anyone making those overtures, but apart from the vote of confidence, perhaps that's something else to explore as well.
Mm-hmm. Other than that, Tricia, of course, the first time Pakatan Harapan leads a government was in 2018 to 2020. What can be learned during those 22 months?
I think the first thing is to get the confidence and gain the buy-in from the civil service. The administration is extremely important, and as somebody who used to work in the state government itself, for several years. I know that we really do need to work alongside them. They know the rules and regulations, the ins and outs, the documents, the procedures, much better, far better than any of the politicians or any of the aides would remotely know. They've been working at this for years. So getting the buy-in and confidence, and also not, second-guessing them all the time, I think that's something that PH really needs to learn from its 22 months. And honestly, PH also has not had the opportunity to truly reflect on the lessons learned during that time, because right after that, we were right in the middle of the economic lockdown with the pandemic. So even emerging out of the pandemic, I think there has not been time for reflection. So I do hope that at least the ministers who were in government before would be able to share some experiences, even amidst the rush of forming a cabinet. I think it's important for them to, number one, work with the civil service. Don't start off the conversation by calling them a deep state, accusing them of these things, working alongside them. And then, of course, also working in concert, right, together, collectively. And then a third thing would be actually a communication strategy. I think this was something a lot of people felt was not effective during the 22 months in power.
Right.
Make sure you have an effective Minister of Communications.
Right, definitely. Tricia, the question also, because you talked about formation of cabinet, and in the rush to form cabinet, do you think that Anwar Ibrahim should take into consideration the track record of the previous Pakatan ministers in deciding who gets which portfolio?
I think that's one possibility. I mean, the fact that they were cabinet ministers before already says that they were of a certain seniority to begin with. But I don't think that should be the sole, what's the word? The sole condition, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think we need to also explore whatever talent pool we do have from within the existing coalition, and look at quality. And that's one thing that I said earlier before the election itself, whether or not we need to look at the qualifications of each person, right? What's their background? What's their professional qualifications? When we apply for jobs, we have to show that we have some kind of degree in a certain area to make us qualified. So can we ask the same? And probably that will be challenging because, to be a politician, we don't apply, right, for the job with a CV. So I think we have a limited pool, but it is useful to look at their experiences, look at their own track record, but also not excluding others who have not yet been in minister positions at all. But I do think we have, with the three large coalitions already there's a lot of people to choose from. But I think, the talented pool of skilled individuals, that's something to still, examine.
Yes, Tricia, just extending beyond appointment of ministers, how will the legislative agenda for the incoming government be?
Legislative agenda, wow. Well, I believe that the existing caretaker government had already a draft of the Fiscal Responsibility Bill or Fiscal Responsibility Act. That's something that we've been looking forward to quite a lot because fiscal discipline and sort of consolidation issues need to be part of the agenda very quickly, very soon. This was not in any of the manifestos, by the way, so I don't know whether that's going to be a priority, but I think there's a draft already, and they need to really kind of speed that up. The other thing would be the Government Procurement Act. I know these two things are very technical, but they actually do wonders for transparency and governance, which is what I think the Prime Minister wants to pursue. And then a third would be on the Political Financing Act, which the previous Law Minister, Wan Junaidi, had said that he would want to table in Parliament in November before the dissolution happened. So these are the three things already that are in the pipeline. I look forward to seeing them. There are many others, like amendment of the Whistleblower Protection Act, legislating of the Freedom of Information Act. These are, 5 of the ones that I can think of at the top of my head.
Well, we're hoping our lawmakers will be very busy addressing all of those. Tricia, thank you so much for joining us on this show tonight. We're going to take a quick break here on Malaysia Memilih, Astro AWANI's coverage of GE15 and beyond. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back with more on the questions of what happens now. That's all coming up in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back. You're watching Malaysia Memilih. This is Astro AWANI's comprehensive coverage of GE15 and everything after GE15, all the way to formation of cabinet and until we get more certainty. I'm Melissa Idris.
Yes, and I'm Hafiz Bazuki. And with us today in the studio, Qyira Yusri, who is the co-founder and education director of UNDI 18.
And we haven't heard much from Qyira. We'll come back to Qyira in a bit. We'll come back to Qyira in a bit because we've got on the line with us now lawyer New Sin Yeoh, and he's going to join us to give us a little bit more clarity as to what the Constitution provides for, what guidance it gives when in the process of forming government now, given that we have a hung parliament. Sin Yeoh, thank you for joining me on the show tonight. When we look at the past 5 days since the result of GE15, what were some of the legal precedences that were set, that we as a country have set during this process to form government? You know, and naming this Prime Minister, this is the first time we've had a hung parliament. So how would you review the process and how might that impact future hung parliaments?
Hi, thanks for having me. I think it's been momentous, well, that's an understatement, but momentous not just from the fact that, Anwar has finally Prime Minister after 25 years, but also from the way he was elected. And like many observers have said, this is the first time Malaysia has a hung parliament after a GE. And even though we have a hung parliament after 2020, when there's no one party that has clear majority. So, but this is the first time in a hung parliament a Prime Minister is being elected. And what we have observed from this process is effectively one that can be used for the future. Of course, there are pros, there are cons, but what we have seen over the past few days is that the young Lieutenant Agong, he played a central role in a way setting the stage for the various political parties to arrive at a decision between them who is to be Prime Minister. And, it is not strictly in accordance with the Westminster Conventions, but I suppose times are different and it's a different country. We have seen that political parties deciding to not take any position, and even though that really should have been the first thing that, their first duty is to decide who they are going to support. But so many political parties, you had BN, you had GPS, you had GRS, effectively saying that, look, I'm not going to decide who's going to be Prime Minister, and that is, to me, a failure in their basic responsibility as a political party. They need to express who they are going to support or who they are not going to support. We have seen Pakatan Harapan and Perikatan Nasional coming out with their own candidates. So that is expected of them. But the rest of the parties, I thought that they should have done better. What we have seen, perhaps in a more negative light, is that BN, GPS, GRS, and other political parties besides PH and PN, it's like they decided to leave it to the His Majesty Yang Lieutenant Agong, and that's not the right thing to do, because you are not supposed to drag the monarch into the mud of politics. So that is something that, unfortunately, it is a precedent. It's a bad precedent that we should not follow. And these political parties, what they had decided to do is to hide behind the monarch, to say that, okay, we will just follow whoever the monarch decides. As though as they are they're scared of being criticized by their own supporters, and they're using the monarch as a shield. So that's a bad precedent. And then you have a bad precedent of them having to flip-flop. The use of SDs is still very prevalent. And I think Tan Sri Muhyiddin coming out to say that I have 115, I don't know why I'm not appointed Prime Minister. So, but I'm glad that a good precedent has been set, that we have finally put an end to the use of SDs, because since 2007, since the Perak crisis, we have seen the use of SDs being so opaque, so problematic, and so unreliable. Because confidence is a very fluid thing. I can sign one SD today, express confidence in Anwar, and sign SD tomorrow, expressing confidence in Muhyiddin, and both would be true.
Right.
So the use of SD has been put to rest, so that's great.
That's about the formation, or rather the appointment of Prime Minister. But does the Malaysia Constitution detail how a unity government should be like?
No. In fact, the Constitution is silent on the appointment process and what types of government. All that the Federal Constitution recognizes is that there is one Prime Minister and there is only one Malaysian government. Whatever political sciences or observers decide to call this government, that's really up to them. So it can be a minority government, it can be a coalition government, it can be a unity government. The term that is being thrown about in the past few days is that this is a unity government, but in political science parlance, unity government is a government where all parties are represented in the government and there is effectively no opposition. And we don't know yet, but I suspect that it won't be a unity government. It's going to be a coalition government. And they don't need to be in a formal coalition. They can be in a loose coalition. And we have seen a coalition government since 2020, where you have BN, PN, GPS effectively forming a coalition. So it need not be a formal taking a formal form like Pakatan Harapan or Barisan Nasional. So the Malaysian Constitution, there is no guidance on this, and it only provides for appointment Prime Minister, Prime Minister selecting his cabinet to be appointed by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, and then what happens when the Prime Minister loses confidence, and that's all it says.
Right. So where are the gaps from a legal perspective? So if you're saying that the Constitution is silent, or doesn't provide for this, if you're looking at this from a legal perspective, this minority/coalition government, where are your concerns that there are gaps? Where are the gaps in you?
I think as far as the appointment, well, let me just touch briefly on the appointment process first. For the appointment process of the Prime Minister, I felt that it could be clearer because we rely a lot on conventions. We rely a lot on practices, very subjective practices, and all that the Federal Constitution says about Prime Minister being appointed is that that person is likely to command confidence of the majority. So perhaps that part needs to be clarified. And whatever that happened in the past few days, although it makes amazing drama for us, it's actually very bad. Because it's not great that your democratic process, it's like a Survivor series,
Right.
You
So
don't know who is
show.
eliminated. So that's bad. But as far as the selection of government is concerned, I don't think there needs to be anything to be spelled out in the Constitution on minority government, a coalition government, or unity government, because there is a danger when you tend to over legislate the effective functioning of democracy. Because democracy there's just so many permutations to it, and it's so fluid. So by legislating it, it might make things very rigid, and that's perhaps bad for democracy. So when it comes for the government, maybe Federal Constitution doesn't have to provide further than that, but maybe what we need is that we need to have a Fixed Terms Parliament Act so that we don't need to, go into a GE every year or every 2 years. At least certain functioning of the government can continue, boost investors' confidence. Well, you know all that comes with having a stable government. So maybe that's something to look at, like how they have in UK.
All right. Sin Yew, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. I appreciate your time. That was lawyer New Sin Yew there, giving us some clarity on what to call this government. I mean, we've been calling it a unity government, but
so many terms
technically,
so
a minority government, a coalition government. Yeah, okay. We're going to come back to our guest in the studio.
Yes, exactly. And, Qyira, there's just judging from how CDU has been explaining about the whole situation. How do you see the way forward for Anwar Ibrahim and his incoming cabinet?
Did you agree with what the guests said, both Tricia and Sin Yew?
It seems like for a lay person, I am not a think tanker, I'm not a lawyer like Sin Yew. I am just a person observing. It's like a government, it's a government compromise, right? Where we are in a situation where there are many different new variables where we cannot control, and the leaders are forced to compromise. And I think it's an interesting observation that Sin Yew pointed out, that the political parties, the coalition that never pointed out who they want to be Prime Minister are now supportive of this unity/minority government. It's very interesting because then they would be involved in the majority, but along the way they never indicated who they supported as Prime Minister. So I think that'll be very interesting, and it really changes the dynamics of how politics will be, especially for young people, right? A lot of us grew up with, who doesn't know about the Reformasi movement? Who doesn't know this icon, the living history of Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim? But what does politics mean for us in the future? Is it about loyalty to political parties? Is it about learning from our parents and whether they supported or were against the Reformasi movement? Or is it about championing issues that we care about now? Because, for the past few years with unstable politics, everyone is interested in reform. Everyone is interested to improve policies for the rakyat. So how do we, as voters, don't just limit our voices in the ballot box? I think that's the real question here, and something that everyone needs to consider and think about, right? How do we use this situation to our advantage as a citizen, as a voter? Because now with many different coalitions in government, you have many different manifestos that might need to be fulfilled. Because what does that mean, right? Who do we demand? Who do we hold accountable? So it's a whole new dynamic.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about that, because the idea that people now demand reform, and this is a coalition government of parties or coalitions who have been in government before. We know what their track record is. Granted, not the same.
But not together.
Not together. Not together. So if we were to look at Pakatan Harapan as their track record as government, what do you reckon the expectation will be now that this is Pakatan Harapan 2.0? Right?
Well, is it 2.0 with many different new players, right?
2.0 plus? Pakatan Harapan plus?
Updated.
I think it's very interesting, because if it was just Pakatan Harapan in government, we would say that there's no reason why you can't fulfill the promises that you've made. And I think for many advocates, we would compare it with the 22 months when they were in administration. But of course, it's not fair to compare Pakatan Harapan and BNMPN's track record on the same wavelength, because the playing field was never equal to begin with. So I think personally, as a political observer, we should be, I feel like we need to be patient and see what the permutations is like. Because at the end of the day, for bills, for policies to be passed, ministers play a huge role in it. And political will is something that we say again and again and again and again. Whether this is something that, whether they would have enough of that to pass certain reforms. For example, I think the issue of mothers passing on citizenship to their children is something that almost every coalition promised and included in their manifesto. So I don't see a reason why that would be delayed.
I guess that should be prioritized.
Exactly. The work that various parliamentary select committees and multiple committees have been set up, supposedly under the spirit of bipartisanship, have been set up. With this new government, I don't see a reason why those reforms will not be able to pass. There's no excuse of we were not in government, we have no power, no influence. You are supposedly all working together now. So there's no reason why these reforms shouldn't be passed.
No excuses, right?
Yeah, no excuses.
Yes, and now the question is, I'm just wondering, just getting your opinion. Will this government be the great equalizer? I mean, will history look at it and see it the 2022 government is the one that keeps, just bring a new era of
this
politics.
is the starting point. This is going to be the big chapter, the start
I think
of
it's
the
a new
chapter.
frontier.
It's a new
if we're
frontier.
going with the references here, right? It's a new frontier for sure. What it would evolve into, I think, is something going to be something very exciting, because there's no good guys, bad guys anymore. There's no, it's not as simple as black and white anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Shades of grey.
Well, too many metaphors on this show, guys. But on that note, that there are no good guys and bad guys, I think in some people's minds there are. And this is where our next guest can provide some insight. We have joining us on the line, we have Jason Wee, co-founder of Architects of Diversity Malaysia. We have not yet gotten him on the line, but maybe I can get your thoughts on this, because if GE15 has taught us anything, or has shone a spotlight on anything, is the fact that we really should be paying attention to the widening social bubbles in our country. We know Malaysia is a divided nation. That's undeniable. We have our strengths, but this is one of our weaknesses. This is decades of policies that have segregated us according to race and religion, and I think it has resulted in what we've seen in GE15 has resulted in maybe deep misunderstandings and deep divisions that we've seen in the campaigning, in the results, and also in the conversations afterward, right?
Yes, that's definitely it. I mean, we can see on the social media many sentiments being expressed there, and I think we would like to get your thoughts on it, Qyira. Like, do you think that especially with UNDI 18 in has, I mean, there are certain groups who say, oh, it's UNDI 18's fault also.
That's true, isn't it? There's been a lot of blame laid on
There's a lot of that, and
I don't think that's justified.
we were like, I mean, as the co-founder of UNDI 18, I mean that wasn't the reason, right? Why UNDI 18 was. How do you respond?
I think it's very interesting that people feel entitled to the votes of the youth. Just because young people can vote doesn't mean they automatically vote for you. And I think this is something consistently we have been saying for the past few years, ever since UNDI has been passed, is that we cannot assume all young people vote the same way. Not all young people think the same. Young people, just like any other demographic of humans, have a variety of thoughts and political ideas, political opinions. As voters, we are influenced by our surrounding, our parents, our teachers, our government, and social media, first and foremost, right? And I think what's more important is that we need to segmentize youth voter sentiments and also the automatic voter sentiments.
Right.
We have not just empowered young people to vote, but we've reduced the barrier to vote immensely. You know, I'm hearing so many stories that, and I'm sure when we do polls and we look at the data later, you'll find out so many people who never voted before, but way past 18 years old, are voting for the first time.
Okay.
Right? I'm sure the salurans have increased massively. I'm hearing in some schools in Damansara, like 14, 15 salurans. That's incredible, right? And the lines are long all day long.
Yeah.
So when you reduce the barrier of voter to vote immensely like that, you cannot, we cannot assume and blame just one particular demographic to swing.
Well, Qyira, then, how do we make sense of the blame that's laid at the door of social media, TikTok particularly, right? So a lot of people pointing to, young people have been influenced by very partisan and almost discriminatory conversations or narratives on TikTok. How do we, where is the nuance in that?
I think, well, first and foremost, I think if we observe politics, especially if we observe how social media has been used in politics, we can see in the Philippines election how TikTok and social media has been
Do you see parallels?
Yeah, I do see parallels, especially how misinformation has been spread. I think, I mean, some people have pointed out how it is something that we need to be aware of this election, but I think in particular we didn't expect that the tones that's being used on social media is, sliding into conservatism and fascism in this manner. So I think that's very, very concerning. But it's not just young people that consume social media. I mean, I'm sure we're all in multiple WhatsApp groups where, our parents, the older generation also consume, and grandparents also consume this content. The issue, especially with TikTok as compared to many other video platforms, is that it's so easily downloadable and easily spread. So I'm not a fan of controlling content or controlling information out there, but something needs to be done to ensure that people can consume this information in a smarter way. I think, if anything, this election proves that there's a lot of work to be done to educate people out there, not just on voter education, political education, but also in identifying misinformation. Because otherwise, we'll keep consuming this kind of toxic content, and it's not just going to be politics that get affected, but every aspect of our personal life, how we view, different members of society, how do we view our peers, will also be affected as well.
Do you think that that responsibility falls a lot on the shoulders of
young people?
Of UNDI 18 as well, right? You talk about voter education, you talk about...
the very face of...
You think, clearly that civil society has stepped up and filled this gap, but it doesn't feel like it should be civil society's responsibility solely.
A lot of people seem to assume that UNDI 18 as an organisation should be responsible for voter education for the whole country. I just want to say we're a team of like 6-7 people, all young people. And I just want to also point out that my team, this particular election, has been working amazingly in delivering postal votes. And that alone is increasing voter participation in such a high number. Our organisation, together with other youth organisations, very important youth organisations, delivered 33,000 votes from overseas to the returning office.
It really shouldn't be the responsibility.
It should not be the responsibility of an NGO. It shouldn't be like young people coming together worried whether their votes will matter or not. It shouldn't be our job. But hopefully moving forward, government and agencies realize that when they allow this gap to increase, when they allow this this vacuum of the problem is, and I think Jason, actually, maybe he can talk about it more later, on his Twitter thread pointed out that there is no safe space for young people.
There's no third space.
Yes, there's no third space
right?
for young people to experience politics. It's like NGOs will try our best, but we're not in schools, we're not teachers, we're not institutions, and it's astounding that institutions and agencies don't realize the responsibility they have to educate the masses.
All right, we're going to take a quick break here on the show. We'll come back with more on this topic. Stay tuned to Malaysia Memilih on Astro AWANI. Welcome back. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Hafiz Marzuki.
You're watching Malaysia Memilih. This is Astro AWANI's comprehensive coverage of GE15 and beyond. Joining us on the line now, we have Jason Wee. He is the co-founder of Architects of Diversity Malaysia. It's a non-profit that aims to bridge communities and identity groups among youth. Part of the work that it does includes running programs designed for secondary school students in Malaysia to tackle the questions about living in a multicultural society. So Jason, glad that you could join us tonight. I particularly want to hear what you thought, what your takeaways were about the results of GE15. What resonated most with you as someone who works to bridge these divides among youth?
Right, thank you. So I think, when the results first came out, I think the ascent of pass is clearly a shock to many of us. And I think in a way that demonstrates that, one, that this is a sector of society that we need to take seriously, and it cannot be this anymore. But secondly, it also means that society is getting more divided. We cannot downplay the kinds of racial and religious sentiments that were played up immediately after the elections. Those were serious. We saw threats of violence on TikTok, and we're talking about youth, kids really, who are introduced to the system for the first time. They're coming from years of a system built upon, of suppression of voter information. And really what we're seeing here is information asymmetry. So in people not getting the same kinds of information, and essentially leads to polarization. I think one main things that we will be looking for next government is, and specifically now Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, is how will he tend to this divide that's upcoming. And so really it's going to be something of a feat, especially when youth are already coming to age and are already in different places of perspectives.
Yes, so Jason, in your Twitter thread, you actually point out to an influencer vacuum. How do we actually, understand it, understand this particular phenomenon? Sorry, Jason, did you hear me?
Okay.
Yes,
Yes, I can hear you.
we can speak to Qyira,
Right.
who's still with us.
Well, we actually, I think we have Jason back on the line. Jason,
yes.
would you mind just repeating your question of this?
Basically, in your Twitter thread, you actually pointed to an influencer vacuum. Maybe you could explain to us about this particular phenomenon, as you say.
Right. I mean, it's really not just an influencer vacuum. We're talking about kind of the hollowing out of third spaces here. When we look at how our government institutions, one, have not only perhaps become a lot more Islamized, but it has also become a lot more homogenous. So on one hand, you have institutions and there's lack of bridges between different people. And at the same time, where are people trusting and getting their information from? And for a lot of youth, when you open Instagram, you're opening TikTok, it's not really organizations you're following. Sure, some percentage of youth get your information from trusted news sources, but a large percentage rely on individuals, trusted individuals that can form that relationship online. And what happens is that for at least in the Malay-speaking world, there are a lot of PUs or pencetus umas that have real great influence over the Malay-speaking world. However, in the English-speaking world,
Okay. Yes.
Right. I think we're having some connection issues with Jason, but
to be fair, he is in Morocco.
And so
we're
what it means.
grateful that he's
Thank you so much.
tried to join us tonight. We will come. Qyira, Yusri, who's in the studio with us.
Hopefully with no connection issues.
Yes.
Let's hope not.
There's no buffering. Yeah.
Let's hope not.
Yeah. Let's continue the conversation about what Jason pointed out.
I think, the conversation about third spaces is very interesting, right? Because in many places where freedom of expression, freedom of speech is celebrated and not as suppressed as in Malaysia, a lot of young people would discover politics organically, not through the fact that their voices were suppressed. I think if you see the rise of young politicians this time around, I'm very happy to see people like Adam Adli, for example, being elected into MP. I mean, I grew up seeing him as the student activist, right? He was being suppressed, he was suspended, and then maybe suspended for many years, and he finally graduated, after. I'm not sure how Asian parents would receive that, right? But he defied the odds, and then now he's in a position where he can actually change the situation for many young people. So I think it shouldn't be, we shouldn't discover politics in a way, in the sense where like we have been oppressed or we've been suppressed. Young people shouldn't discover their passion to help their communities by being mistreated themselves.
Right. So one of the things that I really like about the work of Architects of Diversity is that they create platforms or spaces where you get the intermingling. So it's a very privileged thing sometimes to say that kita semua kawan, and then we have friends of different races. Some communities are very segregated through no fault of their own, through decades of policies. But one of the things I wanted to kind of delve into tonight was, how do we get to that point where we can comment about issues outside of our ethnicity? That was one of the things that I saw a lot in the campaign period and the conversations of forming government and who works with whom, is that, you can't speak about these issues because they're sensitive issues, so you be quiet. But we're all living in a kind of public life, right? So how do you see us getting to a point where we can comment on things beyond our ethnicity without worry?
Yeah, I think this is a problem that requires a lot of work, and it's not something we can achieve in the next few days, maybe not even the next few years, right? There's a lot of wounds that run very deep in minority communities, in marginalized communities, that we can't just, hold hands and say, hey, look, let's just look past all of that and we'll just be a totally muhibah country. I mean, campaigns are a great idea, but systemic reform must happen for us to eventually get to that situation where we don't have to be, we are welcoming and we're accepting and we're not just tolerating the differences that we have in Malaysia. I think people talk about like we need to tolerate each other and things like that. I think that's the idea of tolerance is not the most ideal term,
but
I feel.
it's also sometimes quite superficial.
Yeah, because what does tolerating mean? It means that, okay, This is the bare minimum. Like
The bare minimum.
Yeah, the bare minimum. And we should strive to be beyond that. So hopefully this government of compromise, minority, whatever, unity government, is the first step towards that. It's recognizing that, if I'm looking forward to see how the cabinet formation will look like. And most importantly, how the different agencies will play their role, what sort of initiatives and ideas will be put forward. So hopefully, people can actually the government can role model this new Malaysia.
Government formation can be quite a sensitive issue. There are portfolios deemed to be sacrosanct to certain races, right?
There's a certain formula that we need to follow.
Where do you think that needs to be communicated to the public? So we're not, territorial about what we perceive as our race and our portfolio.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
What I mean?
I think it's very odd that certain ministries are always seem to be given to certain races or certain party or party that represent those particular race.
Yeah.
It's very bizarre to me. And I think Tricia's point earlier was correct. The caliber of the minister that's chosen is going to be very, very important, especially in a fragile compromise like this, because everybody will question your credibility, your background, and the merits. What would you bring to the table? What would you bring to this cabinet? And what kind of ideas, and political will you have to actually, put these changes in? So I'm not supportive of the idea that certain ministries is reserved for this. However, I do understand we live in coalition politics, and this kind of sensitivities is not easily solved by someone as iconic as Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim either. I'm sure it's not easy for him. But I think we must slowly move away from that. Because if these actions are not role model at the very highest level of our country, how do we actually inspire changes to the grassroots, to movements, to people? Why do we need to change when the people that in power are not interested in this kind of and not interested in diversity, not interested in inclusion? But I think this election in particular, with UNDI 18 and with AVR in play, has forced all political parties to consider the candidates they put forward. And I think it's a very good first step, right? I think PH has put forward a disabled candidate in Putrajaya. Unfortunately, she lost, but the campaign she put forward was extremely inspiring. The amount of young people being pushed forward. We have MPs as young as 26 years old being elected into parliament. We have former student activists. We have we have technocrats. We have professionals being elected. So I think Dewan Rakyat this time around is going to be extremely interesting. And even if the cabinet is unable to role model the diversity and inclusivity, I hope at the very least in Parliament, these politicians can push forward and make sure that the conversations, we don't let them get away with it. I hope I think that's the very least.
What a way to end it.
Let's not let them get away with that. Okay, so thank you so much, Qyira, for joining us on the show tonight. We appreciate your time. Fortunately, that's all we have for you on this 1-hour English edition of Malaysia Memilih. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Hafiz Mazuki, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching and good night.